From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be with you for another journey through the news and headlines of our time. Man, we got to roll up our sleeves because the problems we have, they're exhausting, but it takes courage, it takes confidence, it takes positive thinking to overcome the things that we must face, like empowering our economic opportunities. Don't we all want to be able to have a more fulfilling economic outlook, right? To be able to own a home that you can enjoy and invest in, or to own land, to invest in your community, to, be able to not be in debt. So much of people's lives are governed by the demands of debt maintenance. We live in a debt-based society, not a market-driven society, not a voluntary capital accumulation society. I believe it was Thomas Jefferson who said that debt is the ghost of money. It's the absence of money. Credit is, right? It's not the reality of capital. It's the absence of it. And we, in our culture, we have become addicted to debt, addicted to spending and credit and so forth. And it's kind of one of those things that's running its course and it's falling apart. And we're entering into a recession now, and people feel like, my goodness, how much more negativity can we take, right? And so we have to figure out, all right, well, how are we going to do this? Are we going to listen to the talk radio shows that get us hating each other, tearing each other apart, or are we going to listen and join into conversations that are edifying, that build you up, that empower you, that equip you with practical tools that you can use to empower and improve your life? Isn't that such a quaint idea in a world of apathy, in a world of cynicism? Deep cynicism, deep victimology. Everything we see around us is about victimology. Here a victim, there a victim, everywhere a victim. And the problem is that, everybody's jockeying for power over who is the biggest victim of them all. And everybody covets the martyr's perch of Jesus' cross, but they don't want to bear the weight of the responsibility of carrying that cross in their life. They want the postcard Christianity, not the reality of bearing the weight of your responsibility, of taking ownership of the plank in your eye before you look at the speck on your neighbor's. We always want to justify why we believe we're the special one. We're the special one. We're the chosen. We're the ones that deserve special status. The things that we've missed out in life are not anything to do with shortcomings or happenstance or things that we can improve on, but only a product of people stealing them from us. Creates a misanthropic community, a misanthropic culture, obsessed with power and grievance, hungry, always hungry for more of the same: power, grievance, grift, scam. And then when someone says, hey, can we do something special? Can we just focus together on loving each other as our neighbors? Boo, the crowd will say sometimes, right? Can we treat each other as individuals? Boo, we want to go to war. The crowd roars for war. The crowd roars for envy and mimetic desire. I want to be them. And they won't say it, but they'll sure show it. The crowd will always show that they are driven by a desire to be the other, to one up the one that they say is evil or unworthy or undeserving of whatever they have in life. pure, all-consuming envy is the fuel of our economy. That's not the product of freedom. It's the product of an impoverished and indentured and enslaved to debt society. So where do we go? How do we get through this? Who do we turn to in this time? Right? Who is going to save us from this body of death that we seem to be trapped in? And it is a matter of life and death, really, because this economy is teetering at the brink, and the social fabric is fraying at its very edges. We are losing the respect for the individual that is the fabric of a healthy, beautiful project that can encompass people from all over the world, if they are rooted and committed to the same principles of individual liberty that makes this project work. We cannot have a society that rolls back respect for the individual liberty and have all the different balkanization of different communities, entrenching of tribal ethno-narcissism. It won't make a society. It will create balkanization, conflict, and petty rivalries and violence and stupidity. Ultimately, idiocy. Dark age idiocy is what will be the result. Because you can't build a plane like the Wright brothers did if you're so stuck on hating somebody else because they're a different group than you. You can't be like Nikola Tesla and create alternating current if you're obsessed with grievances from something that happened to your uncle or your brother or your great-great-great-great-grand person or great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great, you know, how many greats do we have to great to deny our greatness, right? That kind of backwards mindset is ripping us apart. And it comes in all kinds of forms and fashion. The liberal project that we have been experimenting with has driven off of a cliff because it wasn't able to protect the individual in its experimentation of advancing liberty against oppression. Right? Once it lost its eye on flesh and blood human persons and on the concept of forgiveness and on the concept of the fallen nature of all human beings, once it loses that concept, in other words, once it loses the biblical wisdom that anchors liberation in an ethical and prudent way, once that is completely lost, it just returns us back to ugly paganism of might makes right, of will to power. People talk about the ugliness that people see in terms of how children are being politicized and, losing their innocence. They're being taught to lose their innocence. But this is the way of the world in the Roman age before Christianity. This is the way of the world around all kinds of cultures prior to Christianity saying, hey, you children are sacred. You're not going to take advantage of them because they're small or young and trusting and naive. And Jesus brought a revolution that has protected children, billions of children around the world. Thanks be to God. And we are like giant infantilized fools who are so stupid and so dumbed down and so obsessed with our own idiocy and our own arrogance that we are teetering on the edge of destroying the foundations of what Jesus' movement of personhood has won in history, slowly, painfully, patiently, overwhelmingly, for the least of these. I saw a pastor in Atlanta, Georgia, using his pulpit to promote, how righteous it was to support Raphael Warnock for the U.S. Senate. And this isn't to say that it would be a righteous thing for him to have promoted the other person. And this isn't to say that it is wrong for a pastor to engage in the question of politics in the civic sphere from the pulpit, as Jesus did, and as Paul did. He contended for the faith in the public square. And the biblical text has a lot to say about Caesar and money and all these things that were wrapped up into the word politics. But the problem is that he was selling his flock to a politician who is in the service of things which are diametrically opposed to everything that it means to be in the body of Christ. To be in the service of wicked wars that should not be happening, that are enriching sick psychopaths that make money and profits from the killing of innocents and the killing and unnecessary shedding of blood. That's what Raphael Warnock is supporting. Endless wars with his reliable votes. Endless murder, death, and destruction that doesn't need to happen. That is a blight and a blasphemy on the name of Jesus Christ. This is a person who is pushing and supporting the destruction of the wealth of widows and orphans through the pillaging of the people's money, through the debasement of their currency, through the Federal Reserve Central Bank printing money out of thin air to the tune of trillions of dollars, which is now creating insane levels of inflation that will only get worse. And Raphael Warnock, instead of challenging the money changers, is doing everything he can to empower them as a reliable servant for their wicked ambitions of avarice and destruction of the least of these. This is a person who is a reliable servant for mass surveillance. This is a person who is a reliable servant for a status quo of victimless crime laws not being challenged on any significant degree. This is a person who is reliable in lying to his constituents about the toxicity of United States federal government's recommendation to eat copious amounts of vegetable oils, which are creating the vast amounts of inflammation that so many people, including those with limited resources especially, end up eating on their plate every day because it's the cheap subsidized food that our government makes artificially cheaper in relationship to the natural, healthier food alternatives. Raphael Warnock is a kind of person who is a reliable voice for empire, decadence, theft. And, people talk about the New Testament. Let's look at the Old Testament for a moment. Every prophet, it's time and time again. The story is clear that the prophets speak for the voice of God when they speak for the voice of the victim, when they speak against decadent kings who lie and cheat and steal and use violence and sacrificial coercion to push people into the mud and smash their faces into the ground and to lord over their people in a wicked and diabolical way. And that is everything that someone like a Raphael Warnock and probably his opponent would be in the service of. So I just don't understand how we expect to pull out of the spiral into insanity and chaos that we're headed in if we can't delineate what is true and what is real and what is beautiful from that which is a counterfeit of all of those things. And it starts in our communities. It starts at the local church and the local civic institutions, the local community gathering opportunities that we have. That when you hear someone say, I am a representative of Jesus Christ and I proclaim that Caesar is Lord and you must take this shoddy trash product that is harming you, that has been deliberately misleading you for avarice and ambition and God knows what, woe to you who uses that opportunity to actually blaspheme and to use the name of God in a vain way. Because that's exactly what that is, to use God's name vainly. To say this is God's will, that people should have their bodies blown apart in wars that would have never happened with a serious country that would have brokered peace in Ukraine a long time ago and would have never allowed us to blow up churches in Syria and to arm ISIS and Al-Qaeda to the teeth. You cannot say that these evil, disgusting oppressions against the least of these have anything to do with the place that Jesus built. And so that's where we have to start as we rebuild a better community, as we build back better from the rubble of these fallen idols of globalism, neoliberalism, materialism, consumerism, whateverism. We have to be able to tell the truth. And if we can't tell the truth in the church, if we can't tell the truth in the pulpit, if we can't call out liars like this who are in the service of corporations and psychopaths, but they use rhetoric and they play with grievances and they tickle ears with resentments and they stoke the fires of envy and narcissism. And then they tell you that is the voice of God. There's a special kind of hell on earth that comes to those who follow those Pied Pipers into oblivion. How's that for a light opening, huh? So that's the point, folks, is that we have got to get our facts straight when we want to talk about the issues of our time. We've got to not mince words anymore. It's an interesting time we live in. I see this headline in unheard.com, a biostate won't cure the West. Talking about the WHO announcing vaccine passports in this story. I see people, acting like, nothing really is going to come of the ugly abuses that happen with lockdowns and forced medicine. They're still lying about it. They're still telling you to take a product that was made for a strain of the virus that isn't even on the marketplace of biological consideration right now, I see these stories and I keep going back to these foundational questions of who we are as a people. And do we have the courage to tell the truth? And do we have the courage to live the truth and to watch out for the pitfalls that are around us as we try to do this? And it's up to us to have the courage to see this through. Because we're going to go through a rocky, turbulent time, and we're going to have people come and promise that they're friends of liberty, they're friends of humanity, And yet they're just going to draw us into endless desire, covetousness, endless, dead ends. It's a difficult time, folks. And we have to, that doesn't mean that everybody has to be a purist that we have to work with. I've said before, I think the things that Elon Musk are doing are very important. And I hope he really succeeds. It looks like he's willing to even build his own alternative to the Apple iPhone as Apple continues to, I guess, threaten him in various ways that they're going to take the unprecedented power grab move of potentially taking the Twitter app off of their store so that people can't even have access to the platform as an app. Daily Mail talks about how Elon Musk says tyranny is all that lies ahead if free speech is lost in America, as he prepares to release sensitive Twitter files on suppression. This is a battle for the future of civilization. He's expected to disclose the full details of Twitter's 2020 censorship of the New York Post's reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop. And I hope he succeeds in revealing all these different lies. All these different, because we have been in a giant psyop for decades and generations, but it's getting worse and more aggressive and more nasty and more unhinged and sick and sadistic. And the kind of crazy stuff that, San Francisco values that have normalized over there have been artificially shoved down the throats of the whole world because of this Twitter platform artificially rigging the most bat-crazy, insane, anti-human ideologies and trying their very best to convince people who are mimetic, who want to go along with the crowd fundamentally, who want to go along with the herd, that the herd has soundly accepted the mental insanity coming out of their violent ideology. And to have that put on us for so long has caused so much suffering on so many different levels, from the pandemic lies that they enabled to the divisive lies around different tragedies in our recent history. And all these different things have done so much to hurt and to polarize people and to take a wrecking ball to basic, decent civilization. And so let us hope that Twitter is able to be steered in the right direction and that it's able to prosper financially as a beacon of free speech, integrity, and hopefully truth can rise in that environment. Let us hope that this could be the beginning of a renaissance, because I think what Elon Musk is doing right now, if he is able to see it through and not back down and not to equivocate with different corrupt, powerful people, he could really do more than any of these political figures have ever been able to do in some time. That's the power of voluntary market action over political nonsense. Let's take a break and return in just a moment on A Neighbor's Choice. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gornoski. Hope you're doing well as we soar across Central Florida live on FM, on AM, worldwide, on our website, podcast, video platform, all of it, of course, aneighborschoice.com is the hub for it all. You can listen live on the audio stream. Just click Listen Live, or hit the player on the home page, and you've got our program wherever you are, and we see you all over the world as our global audience continues to grow and our Florida audience continues to grow here on Radio Land. And we just love the harmony of these different mediums coming together. It's exciting. And speaking of exciting, it's always great to read the Substack of my guest who joins me now. He's a great, thoughtful person, and he's dealing with a lot of big ideas in a way that's very approachable. We have with us Chris Bray. How are you, sir?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing great, too. You know, I saw this piece you had out just a couple hours ago. It says, "The Politics of Self-Loathing and Death Instinct, a Culture of No Future." I mean, that's such a cheerful headline. How'd you come up with that?
It's just there's so many things coming together at the same moment that keep having the same thing. I even realized, having written that piece, that I left a bunch of them out. One of the big ones is Elon Musk takes over Twitter, and he says his first priority is to remove material related to child sexual abuse. And a bunch of activists say, oh, God, thank you. We've been asking Twitter to do this for 10 or 12 years now, as long as Twitter has existed. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing, that there have been hashtags on Twitter that are coded hashtags that people use to refer to child sexual abuse material. And Elon Musk comes along and says, oh, maybe we should get rid of that. And it's a significant change and a sudden new development. And at the same time that's happening, Balenciaga, luxury fashion house that I would have never really noticed or thought about buying things from, never really needed a $2,000 pair of boots, but they're advertising their products with things like pictures of children holding their teddy bears in bondage gear on sets that are decorated with sly and subtle references to child pornography. And one of my state senators in California, who's up in the Bay Area, I'm down in Los Angeles, has been talking for a long time now about how proud he is that a guy named Scott Wiener, who represents San Francisco in the California Assembly, how proud he is that in California, 12 to 17-year-old children can get medical treatment for sexual assault injuries, intimate partner violence, sexually transmitted diseases without their parents needing to know about it or consent to it. He said this week that if you're ever using the word groomer or talking about grooming, that's homophobic and transphobic, and you should never do it. We need to wipe the word groomer and the word grooming out of our vocabulary. And I could go on and on giving all these examples, but it seems like we're in this bizarre, perfect storm of a moment when suddenly all over the culture, people are talking about childhood and about children in highly sexualized terms, and objecting to people objecting, saying, you can't talk about pedophiles, that's a minor-assisted person. You know, we have to stop pathologizing minor-assisted persons. You can't use the word groomer or talk about grooming behavior because that's homophobic or transphobic. There's a sudden emergence from every direction of a sexualization of childhood and a sudden emergence of the theme that you're not supposed to talk about it.
Yeah, and so you're not supposed to talk about it, but how do you connect that to the idea of self-loathing and death instinct culture?
Yeah, there's so many ways, but start with the fact that when you talk about children, you're talking about the future. I think we all are used to a kind of political discourse where we say we're making a decision for the people who will be here after everyone in this room is gone. I had a city I used to live in where the city manager used to say all the time, this is a 100-year decision. The decision we make here is not for the people in this room. It's for the people who will be here after we're all gone. When we talk about children, we're talking about our future. We're talking about our idea of what the world will be 20 years from now or 50 years from now. And so to suddenly see people treating childhood and treating children as sexual as this sort of dark. To talk about childhood in really dark terms, I think, is to talk about hating the future, to talk about hating life, to talk about a kind of self-loathing that doesn't see ourselves being projected into the future. And I think about it, too, in terms of what we've just done to children during the pandemic. There was a piece by a writer named Beth Collins in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution a few days ago that said, it was written as an open letter to children, and it said, "Oh, children," I think the opening words were, "Dear kiddos." She said, "Thank you so much for all the sacrifices you made during the pandemic," as if they chose the sacrifices. She said, you couldn't go to school and you were lonely and we didn't let you see your friends and you were locked inside your house. And so many of you are experiencing trauma and learning loss and lost speech development, but you kept us safe. And thank you for that. And she says, our obligation as adults, because you've done so much, you've sacrificed so much as children to keep us as adults safe, we owe you the mental health services you need to get you through this trauma that has happened in your lives. And so what this piece says is, we sacrificed you. Adults sacrificed children so we could feel safe. And things like that, talking about adults not protecting children but sacrificing children, I think is a destruction of our future, an abnegation of our future, a turning of our backs on what comes after us in favor of what we want, of us feeling safe as adults, of us feeling gratified as adults, of our pleasure, of our sensation, of our enjoyment of life. Oh, sorry, kids, we had to sacrifice you so we could feel safe, but don't worry, we'll get you mental health services. And I've been thinking constantly, I hope everyone is following what Canada is calling MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying. And that's a government euthanasia program. It's a government program to help people get doctor-assisted suicide. And it started out as a program for people with terminal diseases, people who are in pain and dying anyway. And it has become a program where people are going to the doctor and saying, "Oh, I feel really depressed, and I've been really depressed for a long time." And the doctor says, "Oh, well, would you like information on medical assistance in dying? Medical assistance in dying? Like, would you like to know how to kill yourself with help from a doctor?" So I see all around us, I see death instinct and the refusal of the future, and I see it percolating into showing up in all of the discussion when we talk about the way we treat children and the failure of our duty as adults to sacrifice ourselves for children. We have people in the newspaper saying, "Thank you, children. We sacrificed you so we could be safe." I think that's talking about sacrificing our future and sacrificing the world that will exist after we're all gone.
So, did you see that in the keeping of the theme you're talking about here of that video advertisement of a major Canadian retail establishment, like making a very beautiful, life, it's so mysterious. So amazing. You just have to pay attention to all of its magic as you kill yourself. I'm like, what in the blue hell are these people doing?
Simon is a company. It's like Macy's or JCPenney, right? It's a company that sells skirts and blouses and jackets. They sell clothing and stuff for your house. They'll sell you a candlestick. And the way they're advertising skirts and blouses and candlesticks and linen napkins is a woman sitting on a beach. It's a real woman. It's a woman who really used MAID, medical assistance in dying, to end her life. And they got all this footage of her, like sitting on a beach saying, "Oh, life is wonderful. And so is dying. And now that I'm dying, I see the beauty in life." And it's an ad for clothing for a retail store that will sell you some clothes, you can go buy a shirt. And the theme of the ad is, dying is a really beautiful part of life. You should really seek death.
Jeez. So how does a culture get to a point where this is now the new mainstream value to kill yourself, basically? Like, how in the blue world did we end up here? I mean, you remember the 90s, the 2000s, and 2010s. I mean, it was not like this. Now it's like openly crazy town here. It's sick.
I don't know. I wrote today about all of these things coming together in this culture of death, and I said, it's not clear where this is coming from. It's not clear how it ends, although I think it ends with a lot of personal ruin. But I don't know if we're all dragged into it or if it's possible to opt out of this. And one of the replies I got was one sentence long, and it said, maybe you forgot the wages of sin is death. And there's a theme in my comments that, I encourage people to look at, that what's happening is the decline of religion, the decline of values, the decline of a shared store of values leaves us stranded and broken. And I think there's so many ways we're trying to talk ourselves into the idea of the world being ruined. I think everyone knows a young adult. I think many people know, especially if you live in the blue zones, a young adult who says, I'm not going to have children because of climate change. I don't want them to grow up in a world that's falling apart. Marriage is declining. Church attendance is declining. Birth rates, rates of pregnancy are declining. Fewer and fewer people are having families. We're becoming less and less connected, and we have significant loss of a shared store of values. And what's left is despair and a sense of being ruined. And I think people have a deeper sense of being harmed and ruined by valuelessness.
Yeah.
Than they can fully understand or explicitly express. And I think this sublimation of this thing that people can't talk about, that people feel but can't pull up into full consciousness and articulate fully, comes out in this flood of weird images, sexual images of children, the mukbang videos that we've talked about before, of people eating themselves to death and weighing 500 pounds and saying, here's my 20,000 calorie meal that you can watch me eat. I think there's an inarticulated, semi-conscious sense of loss. We all know we've lost something. We all know that we've lost family and community and religious values and shared connection and a shared store of values. We know that we have deep cultural losses in ways that we're not really talking about and not really confronting. And it shows up in a kind of sublimated discussion, a kind of semi-conscious images of sadism and death and ruin to express things that we can't fully express. I really wonder about the person who said, let's shoot this Balenciaga ad for luxury clothing with the image of a little girl holding her teddy bear in bondage gear. How do you get there? How much do you have to lose to reach that point where that makes sense to you?
Well, doesn't it seem like a society that is just violently thrashing out at every boundary and every no that, has always been kind of traditionally maintained, no, we're not doing that. No, you don't do that. No, that's an adult. This is a child. No, this is not acceptable. No, you don't get to lie. And no, you don't get to take people and keep them out of the ICU if they don't take your little product. Like we've just shredded so many boundaries so fast, and it feels like a temper tantrum collectively or something,
Yeah.
Thrashing about. You will not tell me no. I will cling to my yes to everything I want, even if it means, extermination.
Yeah, nothing is true. Everything is permitted.
Right.
A friend said to me a while ago, a friend who had children before I did, my wife was pregnant. We were getting ready to welcome our first child. And he said to me, there's an instinct people have now to be friends to their children, but your child's not looking for a friend. Your child's looking for a parent. Your child will be comforted when you say, you may not do that. When you say to your child, you must go to bed now. You can't eat that. You have to do, you have to get enough sleep. When you establish rules and boundaries for your child, there's a kind of cultural sense now that that's being mean and that's being harsh, and it's not. It's an act of kindness, and your child will be comforted to know that you're thinking about her life and her safety and her well-being, and drawing lines around her and keeping her inside those lines that she's safe and nurtured inside. And I think that persists into adulthood, the sense people have of not having any cultural limits, anything that's inappropriate, anything that's too far, anything that you shouldn't say. I mean,
not to go too much of a different, not to go off too different, but don't you think a lot of this is a product of, like, this is what happens to a society when they have the world's monopoly on, running the world, and they're able to export their inflation so long that they never experience the effects of profligate spending. So they literally get to have an experiment where they can create money for nothing, and you can have it all, right? And you can chase everything, and everything's just going to be offloaded on somebody else, and this kind of, stupid myth. And it like, when you do that, since the 1970s, we got off the last vestige of the gold standard, and we've just printed our way into oblivion. This is what kind of moral outlook that looks like, right? I mean, isn't that one way to see this?
The explosion of unearned affluence. I'm sorry to keep talking about the same thing over and over again, but if you watch mukbang videos, for God's sake, it's people sitting down with giant piles of food and gorging themselves and weighing 500 pounds and eating 10,000 calories and having you watch them shove the food in your face. What is that? But people having too much that they don't have to work for, that's cheap, that's easy, and it doesn't satisfy them, and it doesn't really fill them up, and so they just keep going. The danger of unearned affluence. And the cycle, I'm the 40,000th person to say this, but the cycle of hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make hard times. I think we know where we are in that cycle. I think the extraordinary wave of sort of printing press prosperity and last standing empire prosperity is showing up in our lives. Absolutely.
Do you believe that this is, this is a cycle, pendulum swing kind of thing, or do you believe that history, or at least our history as a people, is heading in a certain direction that's kind of unprecedented? Is this just going to swing back and forth, and like some people think, or do you think it's actually going somewhere?
Yeah, my view of history is completely a cyclical view of history. I think everything comes and goes. I think everything has its time. But the question is always how long the cycles are and where you are in the cycle. And I had hoped, I think it's stupid to hope this, but I had hoped that the last election would be something of a course correction or an inflection point, and I don't think it really turned out to be that. But some shared expression that things have gone wrong and we need to change it a bit. And I don't think we got it at all. And I think the downward cycle, I think the cycle of being lost, I think we may be earlier in that cycle than we think or hope, and it's going to go on for a while. And I think there are multiple answers to be had about how you try to address it, and one of them is political and one of them is cultural, but one of them is personal. One is about pulling your family in and pulling a carefully chosen set of people in around you and sort of hunkering down. But my view of history is that we have a lot of decline left to go before the cycle turns.
So when you look at the embrace of death, though, isn't this kind of a unique thing that history, this isn't quite cyclical? I mean, maybe it is. I can see different echoes of it in history, but this kind of open embrace of self-destructive behaviors.
There are.
I think the ancients had this, but they usually had it in a time of carnival, right? And then they got their act together afterwards, usually.
The ancients had it, and I think it was really present in Europe in the 1930s. I think if you look at Weimar, Berlin, if you look at the way George Grosz and Otto Dix painted the human body in German Expressionism as a body sort of coming to pieces, I think people have felt this despair before, and they've felt this sense of things falling apart before. The strangeness of like clothing ads that use suicide and sex with children and BDSM teddy bears, that maybe we may be creating new boundaries in the cycles of historical decadence. I don't know a society that's gone quite that far. I think things like this have happened, but we may be testing the outer limits of some of it.
You mentioned the political corrections, and to that end, what are your thoughts on the current state of seemingly disarray that the conservatives seem to be in the face of, heading into 2024? It's kind of a mess, huh?
I think at the national level, the people who call themselves conservatives just won't talk about the things that we need to be talking about. They're just not there.
Right.
I don't sense them as a presence. I don't sense Mitch McConnell as someone who's in any of this fight or any of this discussion.
Right. Well, Chris, I always appreciate having you on. It's always great to think about these ideas, and I want people to check out your Substack, chrisbray.substack.com. It's chrisbray.substack.com, B-R-A-Y, chrisbray.substack.com. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for Hour 1, folks. We'll continue with more guest and commentary and news live on A Neighbor's Choice for our second hour. Stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I'd like you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, put your email in and subscribe to our weekly update of our content highlights, including our online-only discussions. We've got all the great newsmakers in the field of COVID science and pandemic, public health, all the top guys, Dr. Robert Malone, Pierre Corey, Peter McCullough, Naomi Wolf, Paul Alexander, the list goes on, Steve Kirsch. So many scientists at the top of the game and so many doctors. Tess Lowry, Dr. Tess Lowry, all those and more are found on our the science podcast that we do. And you can get all of that on our website, aneighborschoice.com. So don't miss any bit of that. And again, while you are checking us out, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. And let's just search my name, David Gornoski, at whatever podcast platform you prefer. And you can subscribe to the feed, give us a review, and rate it and everything, and share it with friends, because this is not brought to you by Pfizer, and it never will be. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed. Of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be back with you for Hour 2 of our program. And I hope you're doing all right out there. Hope you're having a good day, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. When you're listening to this program, make it the best that you can. Have the courage to just keep improving on where you were the day before and the day before and the day before, and learn not to take yourself so seriously. We've got to learn to enjoy the lightness of life, not getting drawn into the ugliness. Analyze the darkness. We get into the dark depths of what's going on, but we don't leave you feeling like, oh, the only thing I can do is vote for this stupid party or whatever. Or this candidate or whatever. We don't do that, right? That's just dishonest, and it's disgusting, and it's boring, and it's tiring, and we've just all had enough of that. So we don't want to do that on this program. It doesn't mean we're above the fray completely. There are candidates that I've occasionally liked and put on the program and things, people who've done something to shake up the game a little bit. Don't have to agree with them all, but I see things that I think are deeply true that they're sharing. That's kind of the game that so many people want to kind of keep playing that game. And, I want to play that game. We've got to do something better than that. We see what's going on in China, the chaos that tyranny ultimately creates. It's not sustainable, folks. We can talk all day long about what they want. They can talk all day long. Oh, we're going to have the Great Reset. You're going to have to do this and that. But these pie-in-the-sky things don't have to be the future. They can talk all day long about how they're going to build a pyramid, but you still got to figure out a way to make them things work. You get them blocks up on top of one another. And it's not, this idea of, we're going to do this and that. Okay, well, you go ahead and do that. But we're not going to go along with that. We've simply had enough. And we don't want this stuff. We don't want to embrace ugliness and decay. We don't want to be swept up into drama queen culture. We want to have happy lives. We want to work hard, express ourselves when needed, and get on with life. One of the things I like to express is how simple so many of the diseases that we have been afflicted by over the last 100 years can be eliminated out of our lives if we have a come to Jesus moment about the nutrition system we have. I saw the Seed Oil Disrespecter Twitter account, who we've had on the program, him and his wife, a while back. But they have a image, that they put up called seed oil syndrome, and it's just a picture of the different organs affected by eating seed oils. And you've got idiopathic hypertension, stroke, cataracts, coronary heart disease, diabetes, dyslipidemia, hypertension, severe pancreatitis, cancer, breast, uterus, cervix, colon, esophagus, pancreas, kidney, prostate, phlebitis, gout, skin issues, osteoarthritis, gynecologic abnormalities, infertility, polycystic ovarian syndrome, gallbladder disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, pulmonary disease, obstructive sleep apnea, hyperventilation syndrome. So many different things. A little graphic, it just illustrates it for you in one succinct little image. So many different things that people are walking around in deep pain and suffering that are really driven by a very toxic thing that is not, it's not impossible to get that out of your life. So do so. And let's build a renaissance of health together, because our health is our wealth. And not only does it give you wealth in a qualitative sense of life, quality of life going up, but it also literally generates wealth, because the trillions of dollars that our economy pumps into sick care management of all these chronic diseases, all those resources and talent and energy and degree paths, career paths and all these different things are diverted towards something that shouldn't be. Medicine should not be as wealthy and decadent and expansive in our life as it is, in terms of like having to manage all these people's sick care problems. Diabetes and cancer should be driven back to the hinterlands from which they came. These were obscure diseases before seed oils came around and put them on the map as #1 Billboard charting artists, as I say, right? They were an indie obscure band. No one had ever heard of those diseases prior to seed oils driving them into the mainstream of what people can expect if they're eating copious amounts of these products decade after decade. So I give you that over and over and over again because repetition is the best form of teaching and learning and growing together. And you never know who's tuning in for the first time on our live broadcast who has never heard of this message before. Or maybe you've heard this message before and you were kind of letting it kind of just, go in one ear and out the other. Maybe you thought, I don't know, something I heard about that. But, I'm trying to catch your attention because I know that we know somebody in our lives. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you love or care about. Or maybe it's someone you don't like. But you don't want to see them suffer. And you don't have to rely on these pseudo-science crank solutions that these sold-out institutions and media continue to push us towards. These little gimmicks, these marketing creations that market lies to us and prop them up for a time before reality comes crashing down eventually. The only problem with reality crashing down eventually is we don't want it to crash down eventually with our health falling apart in the process, right? We want to be able to have abundant, joyful health. And we all struggle with different things. And I just want that to be a burden that we can start fighting together in various different ways. And I love hearing the different, testimonials and of people's lives who've changed having heard this message and the things that they've chosen to do differently in their lives as a result of this message. I love to hear those stories from you of people, healing different problems that they had, just healing different problems in ways that they never thought they could ever get relief from without having to sell you some stupid supplement or something, right? I'm not saying it's like, good. If you like that stuff, fine. But, I don't, there's a lot of people that, they're trying to find some supplement to sell you as opposed to telling you to just remove stuff out of your life because that's the neighborly thing to do. That's the smart thing to do. That's the wise thing to do. Not just remove, but just replace with good, tastier solutions that are out there. This is not an obscure thing. We're not telling you to eat some obscure, weird, exotic oil that costs $80 an ounce or something stupid. We're telling you to do something that's actually very economical if you're wise in the way you shop and make these choices. So I just want to keep reiterating that message over and over and over again in different ways. And we're going to continue to illustrate that message with thought leaders and scientists and doctors. As we have done, we have led the way on this message, and we will continue to lead the way on this message until diseases start falling off the cliff. We want these diseases gone. We want the obesity epidemic to just fall apart. This whole idea that conservatives just say, just get in shape, or, like they're not even scratching the surface of how this issue can be fundamentally changed at the core. Right? To get these things out of our system, these seed oils out of our system, we would see generations. If we could get these things out of our economy and out of our food supply now, and if you can't do it by government banning them, then you should do it by, huge cultural informational renaissance. But I say, as long as, look, I don't want government to be involved in monopolizing these things, right? But they are going to, Nobody wants to support people who, we've seen the American public that their appetite for liberty is very superficial at this point in our history. The Republicans continue to vote for statist, and you can love Trump, but he didn't do nothing to trim the FDA. He did everything he could to just put in another, big pharma exec like they all do, right? He was just another George W. Bush and Mitt Romney type person on that front. And so you can't rely on those people to save you. But if we're going to have an FDA, then or these things like this, then they should actually do something ethical for once and ban this known carcinogenic substance from food supply. And I know it would be economically devastating at first for some folks in the food business. So there would have to be a transition period, right? They'd have to put a ban on it, but put it out a certain date, and then have transition periods to help people offload and move their economic, resources towards fats that are actually healthy, real foods, not fake, toxic side of, sludge, right? And the kind of, that alone, folks, you want to talk about people are like, oh, we're going to get out of this economic recession, and how are we going to get out of this debt, and how are we going to get out of this decline and meritocracy and all this stuff. Do the seed oil thing. That solves like 90% of what we're doing right now on some level, right? I'm not saying, obviously you've got the spiritual side. Obviously you've got the world view side of things. You've got the, those things that are deep fundamental issues that have to be corrected as we do these, reforms. But you ban the seed oil thing, or you get those things out of our lives voluntarily, or both, that's going to open up a renaissance of people's mental health improving dramatically. And people, rediscovering the joy of life. And it's going to be a generational thing, because a lot of folks who've been eating these products for decades, it's going to take a little longer for them to see some of the returns on this change. Some of them will see it sooner rather than later. Some people notice things like they don't sunburn as viciously after they remove these products out of their food, out of their diet. But, this is something that would really fix. Like, this is one of those, you throw the wedge at the trunk of the tree and you take the whole problem out, the whole machine, the whole, system, the whole problem gets taken out at the core with a big thing like this. And it's a simple thing. It's like, this is those David and Goliath moments, right? You take that slingshot, and instead of trying to, I need a sword, I need this, I need that, I need a tax reform, I need affirmative action removed, I need this removed, I need tariffs this way, I need this tax, all this stuff that politics does, right? That's that whole approach to get the sword, get the shield, get the armaments, right? Get all that stuff. And then you got the David approach, where you take that slingshot, you get those stones, and you make that, boom, that one little shot takes out the giant. And the giant is not just the complex of huge, horrific diseases that we have. It's also the giant of the despair that sets into a society that has come to terms with this being the only way that people can expect to have a mature life, right? We've just learned to, like slaves to misery, just accept this is the way of aging. It will be diabetic, it will be obese or arthritic, or it will be heart disease riddled, or it will be, unless you're doing all these little things and stuff, right? And that's such a burden on a subconscious level, right? That burdens this society, that drives that despair and that anger and that resentment. How many people go and turn to violent political ideologies as a way of sublimating that subconscious hate or that anger and that despair of seeing their loved ones suffer with, unnecessarily painful and miserable health declines and the economic burdens of paying for those sick situations, right, of our elderly or our loved ones. How much of that stuff, that pain and that hurt, gets bottled up and manifests as I hate you because of your skin, and I hate you because you're this, and I hate you because of your gender, and I hate you because you're a Republican or Democrat, right? How much of that comes from that part of our lives, of just like, of baking in? Because when you're a kid, you don't think about these things. If you have a good childhood, God willing, you don't think about those you love suffering and withering and having pain and constantly going into economic difficulty and mental health issues and all kinds of stuff that come with these toxic products, right? And so you have the innocence, you have a joy, and have a zeal in life that people have, and then that wonder of childhood gets destroyed by different things, kind of pouring cold water and disappointment and sadness and robbing people of that joy. And I didn't know when you be an adult, this and this and this and that and this and this and this, right? And again, this is just one part of it, but the health, physical health, has a lot of connection to spiritual health and mental health on different ways of thinking of it. And I am just convinced 100% that this is the biggest issue that we can touch right here and take care of, right? Because, the energy thing is another thing, right? But when I talk to you about cold fusion, low temperature nuclear energy, if I talk to you about 24/7 energy panels and different things like that, that's a little bit like, whoa, that's out there. That's different, right? It's not out there, but I understand how people feel that way. But here's something you can do in your life right now. Go into your cabinet and take those products out of your life. Take them out of the pantry. Take them out of the house. Get rid of them, Get rid of these toxic sludge oils, these salad dressings, whatever it is, mayonnaise, and whatever you have that are these staples that Americans have come to use, or whoever you are, wherever you're from, that have come to use. They have these seed oils all over the globe. But these are things that we should get rid of out of our lives completely, so that we can have that anchoring of a new renaissance. I really believe, and I know people who are not connecting the dots this way, they don't see it this way. They're like, okay, health and nutrition is separate from political, ideological fights and racism and all these different things that people are fighting over. This is something that unites people. This is something that gives people something to achieve together and stand in solidarity together, saying, hey, look, we're working together and we're seeing real results because of our work together as a community to really claim a new day, a new reality that is possible for folks to live in. That's what I want you to see. And I know that there's folks that are saying, I don't even understand the seed oil thing. How the heck are you getting all this out of that? But that's why you got to listen to the show, right? Because I'm not going to be able to cover every little detail of every part of the evidence of my case against seed oils every time you tune into the daily broadcast. But I'm going to give you enough to pique your interest, to make you go back and want to go into our archives of our health and nutrition section on aneighborschoice.com and click through the discussions, not just the radio segments we do with folks like Tucker Goodrich, but also the deep dive conversations we do with doctors and scientists that show the data as it actually is, so that you don't have to take my word for it. You can do your homework. I've created this show to be like a type of shadow university for the working person. Whoever you are, someone that doesn't have time to, go and do this study on a formal basis yourself. You can go and talk to scientists and doctors and independent researchers and do your thinking for yourself. Look at the data yourself and come to the conclusion. And I think it's clear that this is a way to take a slingshot strike at the head of Goliath. And I want us to be a part of this. I want us to do this. I want us to accomplish this and watch what happens as a result. It's not a panacea, but I hate that talk when I hear people say, oh, even if we cure all diseases, we'll still fight each other. That's the mental prison we talked about earlier this week, right? We don't want to fall there. Well, so what's the point of doing anything? What's the point of doing anything? I don't want to get out of bed because if I get out of bed, I'm going to have to, at some point, stub my toe, maybe, statistically speaking, or I might have to be annoyed about something, or somebody might cut me off in traffic, or it's dangerous to drive, or it's raining out and I could slide off into a ditch, on and on and on, or I'm going to run into that person at the office that gives me a hard time, and I don't want to do this, right? So I'm just not going to get out of bed. I'm just going to stay here because it's safe. Okay, well, that's safe mediocrity, and I want risky excellence. I want us to try to do something great together as a nation and as a world, because I want the whole world. You see, this is not a scarcity-based thing. I'm not telling you, hey, I got a new drug and I'm going to patent it. I need you to raise money for me so I can own an artificial construct called intellectual property and charge an arm and a leg for you to get my secret solution for a disease. No, I'm saying get these things out of your life. And you can do this wherever you are. If you're in Congo, wherever you are, Indonesia, wherever you live, listening to me right now, get these things out of your life. Take that vegetable oil product, throw it in the trash. Or you can take the oils out and, and if you're an adult, and pour them out and make a little bonfire with it. And then you can write the name of diseases and you can burn those slips of paper in that bonfire made by those seed oils and proclaim a day of jubilee against this artificial construct of so many different chronic diseases that we've learned to just settle with. We will not settle with evil. We will not settle with bondage. We will not settle for a shrunken space of disgust and pain and misery. We will create a new future for the whole world to enjoy, and it starts here, you and I together on A Neighbor's Choice. Back after this. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'm your host, David Gornoski. Hope you're doing well. We're live, and we're joined by a writer at aneighborschoice.com, Surat Dasgupta. How you doing, sir?
Hey, brother, I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Doing well, and hoping that get the volume nice and strong this time, every time we have you on from now on without having to have that delay. But okay. It's becoming a tradition. But I wanted to have you on to talk about some of these themes of the program today and what we've been kind of working out throughout this week so far, and this couple of days we've been doing the show. Mm-hmm. But there's really and I think Chris Bray had a good point in the previous hour talking about this idea of a self-loathing culture, and it manifests in so many different ways. It pops up in so many different ways. It reminds me of what René Girard, the late anthropologist that we've referenced a lot on this program, that I highly recommend for people to get to see the Bible in a completely electric and alive way, in the headlines as well. But he talks about this idea that envy really is the biggest taboo of our society. He says there's a quote that I'm paraphrasing, we talk about sex so much because we really don't want to talk about envy. It's envy that's driving so much of the conversation in the modern world, and it's something that nobody wants to talk about. You're not supposed to admit how much envy rules your own mistakes and grievances or whatever, and you're not supposed to talk about it in a big picture sense of saying, well, I think that phenomenon is driven by envy. You just shut up about that, and you talk about all these other things that we distract ourselves with.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. Uh, there's a famous quote. I don't know who said it. It's often attributed to different personalities. You said before changing the world, I think it was Leo Tolstoy. Before changing the world, you have to change yourself. So, which is harder? Changing other people's minds and forcing them to adhere to your own principles, or being changing yourself first and being an example for other people. So there's another saying that is, that often goes around in churches, that before preaching the gospel, be the gospel, right? And when you talk about envy, is it's more or less the same thing. What is envy? We covet other people's possessions. We covet our neighbor's possessions. We are envious of our neighbor. So we have to fix ourselves. We have to basically see to it that we are not envying uh, things of this world, because if we keep on coveting our neighbor's possessions, we will want more and more and more. We will never be satisfied. And this is what Jesus said. Do not focus on focus on the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added unto you. So, if you focus on the master of history himself, you will be rid of all of these things.
So, one of the things how does that work? How do we see envy cropping up in the choices we make? We're heading into what could potentially be a global recession that could be pretty ugly. We'll see how much they can come up with tricks to try to kick the can down the road and paper over the gaping holes in our foundation of economic prosperity in America, and by extension the world, because of America's dollar hegemony. But how does that envy driven desire that animates how we invest our money, or how we shop, or how we act at work? I mean, I know I'm throwing a lot of different big themes out at once, but these are things that I think we need to think about, how our desire for what our neighbor has, or the way our neighbor talks or acts, can agitate and irritate and drive us into obsessions and fixations on trying to keep up with the Joneses and things in ways that we really can be blind to if we're not stepping back and saying, actually, that's what's driving me to do all this. That's what's driving me to be a workaholic. It's not really the work itself. It's because I want to be that person over there that I was influenced by.
Well, that's a very good question. And since we're now delving into the world of politics, and you also mentioned this fake gospel preacher who is involved in politics, who covets the cross of Christ, but doesn't want to bear the weight of it. So a lot of things that gets thrown around. At its core, it's is the root of envy. For example, reparations. What is reparations? Well, you think you're in a worse position because of some historical uh, grievances or whatever. You think some of your ancestors were treated unfairly, and you should be you should have the equity, the equality of outcome as the same as your privileged neighbor, so to speak. And at the core, the heart of that kind of desire, the desire to get property from extract property from your neighbor uh, coercively, with the use of force by the government, that is envy. And that is eventually going to burn you, because you, first of all, you are not living in your ancestors' world. You are living in the current world, a Christ haunted world. And Christ has made it possible to reconcile in the world that you are living in, because the world that was before was not as much infected by the Christian story as it is now. So when Christ makes the way to the path for reconciliation with your neighbor, you take that reconciliating path and you reconciling path and you forge a way forward instead of focusing completely on your neighbor and your neighbor's possessions and your neighbor's property. You do not look at those things. You look at the future and you look at your own benefit, how you will, uh, how you are going to make a world where your children will be treated fairly, where your children will prosper, not only treated fairly but prosper. And the Christian story makes that possible because we have this sense of we have this notion that the progression of history, because prior to the Christian story, history was cyclical. It was often uh, looked at as a cycle, and as, the eternal recurrence that Nietzsche talked about. What is it? It's like you you vanquish your enemies, you establish a new order, and then another conflict arises and you vanquish your enemies, and it goes around and around the same way. But with the Christian story, that is no longer a necessity. You can transcend that. You don't no longer need to vanquish your enemies. You can transcend your enemies through the love of Christ by reconciling with your neighbor, and by accepting that you yourselves are capable of doing the horrendous things that you accuse others of. And by doing that, you open new paths forward for a bright and prosperous future.
It seems like human beings have a hard time actually digesting the gospel, as you mentioned. We all do. And we all want to make carve outs for this concept. We always want to say, well, my gender, or my nation, or my ethnicity, or my disease, or my height. I am a small person, or something like that. There's always some kind of differentiation identity that people cling to and create a little cult, a little crowd together, a little identity group together. When we always cling to that, it always seems to try to put a asterisk about the call to, like you said, to examine yourself in the mirror before you try to go around and use violence or coercion to defeat an enemy, right? And so how come that gets so lost in translation and daily, Christian communities all over the world, whatever tradition they come from?
Well, that's a very deep question that you asked, because for centuries, people, for example, the mystics of the East have often contemplated and meditated on self-realization. Who is the real you, right? And people often wonder what part is socially constructed, and this is, of course, a part of the daily curriculum of modern day education. And but people focus on their group identities and their sexual identities, and they often dismiss it as socially constructive, as a social constructions, but at the same time they embrace it all the more, which betrays a sense of slavishness to this slavishness to these constructs. People say that, oh, I am of this group, I am of this ethnicity, I am of this uh, gender identity, whatever. But often these things can be a burden of slavery for us. And the real thing that and this
How
is
is it? How is a burden of slavery? Isn't it cozy to just kind of hide in a crowd and say, you know what, I'm not going to stick my neck out there and say, you know what, I've made some mistakes and I'm going to own up to my mistakes, and I'm not going to blame that other person or ask them to, or force them to give me something because they look like somebody that oppressed me or whatever, or they're the same gender of somebody who was hateful to me. I'm going to just own life and take it and go for it. How is that slavery to shrink away from that? Because that's hard for anybody to do,
Well,
to take ownership and say, you know what, I'm going to make my choice to, build myself forward and not look back in anger.
well, think of your inner thoughts. For example, a person has dreams, a person has ambition, person has desires. Every person has a kind of desire, whether we want to or not. It all depends on what kind of desire we have. So these things, if we go into the embrace of identity and say, I'm just going to play the game of tribalism and all of that, what happens is we erase our personality. We erase what makes us unique in the world, and instead of having this wonderful microcosm of the universe within us, we are made in the as units in spokes in a wheel. We have no identity at all. So it's a weird paradox. We lose the real identity that we have, that only makes us unique. The identity having a parentage, like because each of us has different kinds of parents. Each of us are raised differently. We have unique childhoods. We have all these things. Our our likeness. And the the kind of things that we like, the kind of creativity that we are capable of, all that thing goes away, and it's thrown into the trash can when we fully embrace the slavishness of group identity. And while when we embrace the slavishness of group identity, we are directed by the accusatory spirit, which points us towards another group, and we end up in a cycle of violence all over again. And we get into conflict. We want to vanquish the other group. We want to leave no survivors, because we don't have any sense of personality. We cannot fathom the other person has a personality. And this happens in all kinds of groups. I don't care what you call yourself. You can call yourself white or black or Jewish or whatever. You're all susceptible to group identity, and you're just as vulnerable to persecution as the next person.
Again, a lot of the language that we hear from victim identity groups today is all based on Christian presuppositions. And of course, a lot of folks don't want to admit that, but some will openly use Christianity, and they'll say, actually, Christianity says there should be reconciliation. Christianity says there should be, reparations, or in one example. This is a Christian thing. So why do you not want to have restoration and
Well,
reconciliation?
If that were true, if Christianity says that reconciliation is only possible when you enact some kind of penalty from the other person who actually did not commit any crimes, then Jesus would not have died on the cross. Then Jesus would have exacted vengeance upon the whole of humanity for breaking the commandment of God, because that is the penalty for sin, right? The penalty of sin, the wages of sin is death. And all of us are guilty of it. No one is innocent of it. So if we have to exact some kind of monetary gain from another person by coercion against that person's will, then Jesus would not have died on the cross. Then Jesus would have wreaked havoc on the world. So our principle, our guiding principle, is not the vengeful God of ancient paganism, where might makes right, but instead it's a loving and forgiving God of in Jesus Christ, who dies on the cross instead of going after his persecutors. When the Pharisees were mocking him at the feet of the cross, Christ said, Father, forgive them. He prayed, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing. He prayed for their forgiveness. And if humanity uh, does not heed to the call of Christ in forgiving one another, then we will end up in an apocalyptic hellscape where we launch nuclear bombs at each other and finish everything off. Then there will be no one to exact monetary gains from. There will be no reparations. You can forget about it.
What if the calculus is, well, we can convince some suckers to take the Christian side, and we'll take the pagan side, and we'll convince them through their guilt of Christianity and turning the other cheek to play the sucker, and we'll just beat them and defeat them by weaponizing Christianity against good-hearted people, and then we're going to not play fair, and we'll double down on pagan might makes right. What if that's the calculus? So the idea is we'll just destroy our enemies completely, and they'll be two suckers because they're Christians and they turn the other cheek, and so there won't be any vengeance back from them.
You're asking what if
that's the motivation behind so much of victimism, whether it's on the left or the right or whatever?
Okay, so let me just get this clear. So civilizations who endure upon the principle of might makes right, they do not last. It's a historical fact. We can see it in the 20th century alone, with the Soviet Union, with the fascisms in Germany and Italy, and with a lot of other countries. Even in places like Africa, we see tyrant, brutal dictators propping up after supposedly getting independence. They become into tyrannical dictators who oppress their own people. And if you say that this is not a practical thing, like turning your other cheek, well, I am afraid sooner or later you will run out of enemies to vanquish. You will run out of opponents to vanquish, and then you will be left with with no one but yourself.
And it's true. It's true. If we don't, as a society, cultivate merit and achievement and excellence, if all we cultivate is grievance, at some point there won't be anybody to build the roads or to, make the plumbing systems work or the sewage system work, because everybody has just fixated on spending all of their energy and efforts, with vengeance, not excellence. With, I don't want to innovate. Let's just keep what we have now and spend all of our energy, punking out people to hand over resources because you're weaponizing Christian concern for their neighbor against them. But at some point, that society is not gonna know how to keep the lights on.
Yes, absolutely. And coming back to the theme of reparations, let's say you've enacted all the wealth from your neighbor whose ancestors have supposedly tortured your ancestors. Then the other group is going to be poor, and you're going to be left with nothing but a meager amount of crumbs from the master's table, and both of you will be in the ditch, in the gutter, in the ghetto. And whom will you exact more reparations from after that? And whom will the currently impoverished community enact reparations from then? You see, it's just a exercise in futility. It's nothing but economic suicide, and a lot of people aren't aware of it. And it extends into all areas, political, cultural, you name it. It's there. You cannot coerce the other person into doing something advantageous for you. It just doesn't work that way.
What about the idea that Jesus said, when they come for your outer garment, give them your inner garment too? So by that logic, if someone tries to hit you up and say, hey, you need to do climate change reparations because you've polluted the land with your such a decadent empire, pay up billions of dollars, and shouldn't we just pay more? I mean, by that logic of twisting that, right? How would you respond to that?
Mm-hmm. Well, Jesus, the key factor in what Jesus said, when your enemy comes for your cloak, give him your robe or whatever, the key factor is voluntary persuasion. Jesus didn't say go after your neighbor's cloak. Jesus didn't say make your neighbor run 5 miles. Jesus said you do that, right? So uh, when another person is coming to you and saying that, oh, you got to pay up for climate change, you got to pay up for that. All right, you set an example. I'll follow you. Let's see how much of a Christ follower you are, because you cannot be coming and telling me that Jesus said you do this and you do that, while you yourself are living a decadent lifestyle of a antichrist.
Right. So this is not, that's the thing, is that so many of these different little catchphrases and sayings of Jesus have been distorted through the ages to be weaponized in a violent and disgusting, self-centered way. And we've got to be able to untangle the mess step by step, because a lot of people have grown up with twisted views of Jesus. But like Gil Bailey, the great author, says, you can distort the gospel, but in the end, it's going to have its power in a way that we can never control.
Exactly, and I highly recommend the work of Gil Bailey and the work of Rene Girard, because these authors uh, they really unveil the anthropological effect of what Christianity had done in its history.
Well, very good. I really appreciate your time, Surat. Thank you for joining me. As always, great to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you, David.
Check out a neighborschoice.com, where you can click on the essays section and see some of the brilliant articles by Surat Dasgupta, who continues to put out some phenomenal content, not just on our site, but other outlets too. But you want to check out a neighborschoice.com, click on essays, and see some of the good work there. It's always great food for thought, right? And that's what we're going to do. We're not going to let folks tell us the terms of the debate. We are going to set the debate as we feel convicted to do, with hearts of fire, for the truth, for beautiful, for beauty, for truth, for goodness, right? And the Bible is going to always upend the powerful, the haughty, the arrogant, the stupid wannabe Jesuses. There's plenty of cheap wannabe ripoffs of Jesus. They never will come close to how beautiful, how amazing, and how exciting the personhood revolution that Jesus has inaugurated. They won't come anywhere near it. They'll just try to cheaply take some of the energy, some of the presuppositions inaugurated by Jesus' movement, and then try to say, I made that, I did that. Now give me money, give me something. No. You will be completely obliterated by your own overreach. Your own lust for violence will obliterate those who live by the sword, will die by the sword. I'm David Gornoski. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. Godspeed.